Spider-Man's blood was never meant to be a key, but the universe has a cruel sense of irony when it comes to Peter Parker. One moment he was doing what he always did, throwing himself between danger and the people he swore to protect, and the next, a shadow creature born from dimensions he couldn't name had opened a gash across his forearm. The wound was shallow, barely worth noticing in the chaos of battle, but the single drop that fell from his skin found its way to exactly the wrong place at exactly the wrong time. The ancient rune carved into the floor of Avengers Tower had been dormant for centuries. Thor had brought it back from the realm of mist 3 weeks earlier. A curiosity he claimed held no power in this dimension, a relic of forgotten wars between gods who no longer existed. Nobody questioned him because nobody questions Thor when he speaks of Asgardian history with that particular weight in his voice, the one that suggests he has personally buried the memories he describes. Peter's blood touched the center of the rune, and the world remembered what it had been trying to forget. The markings ignited with fire, so white it seemed to burn through color itself, erasing shadows and leaving only blinding absence in their wake. The tower shook from foundations to antenna, structural alarms screaming through corridors as the ancient symbols expanded outward like veins seeking a heart. They crawled across marble floors and wrapped around steel columns, climbing walls and consuming the air until breathing felt like inhaling static electricity. Thor moved before thinking, Mjolnir already singing in his grip as he stepped toward the phenomenon. He had felt many things in his long existence, energies that would reduce mortal minds to ash, powers that predated the formation of stars. But what poured from the awakening rune struck him differently. It felt like reading the last page of a book he was still living, like hearing his own eulogy spoken in a language only gods could understand. It felt like prophecy. It felt like doom. Spider-Man shouted something, a warning perhaps, words meant to pull Thor back from whatever edge he was approaching. But the god of thunder was already beyond hearing. The portal that spiraled open before him did so with violence that cracked reality at its seams. Energy older than Asgard itself bleeding through the wound between dimensions. Colors that had no names in any human language swirled within the vortex, then collapsed into absolute darkness, a void so complete it seemed to observe them with patient hunger. Peter watched Thor freeze, and something in his chest went cold. In all the battles they had fought together, through alien invasions and cosmic threats, and enemies who wielded infinity itself as a weapon, Peter had never seen Thor stop moving. The god of thunder roared when challenged. He laughed when wounded. He charged when lesser beings would retreat. But standing before this portal, Thor became something Peter had never witnessed. Thor became afraid. The void within the portal shifted, darkness parting like curtains drawn back from a window nobody wanted to look through, and an image formed within the swirling emptiness. At first it was unclear, shapes bleeding into shapes, colors that might have been memory or might have been imagination. But with each passing second, the vision sharpened until it achieved a clarity that no dream could match. Thor saw himself lying dead in the ruins of a city that no longer remembered its name. The future version of his body was broken in ways that seemed impossible for a god to break. His armor, forged in the heart of Nidavellir by hands that had shaped weapons for 1,000 divine wars, was cracked and scattered around him like the shell of something that had been hollowed out. Lightning flickered uselessly around his corpse, power without purpose, energy without vessel. Mjolnir lay shattered beside him, reduced to fragments that would never again answer any call. And standing over the god of thunder's fallen form was a figure that stopped Thor's ancient heart. Not Thanos, whose name still echoed through nightmares across a dozen worlds. Not Hela, whose shadow Thor had finally learned to escape. Not Gore, whose blade had carved wounds that took centuries to heal. This was someone Thor had trusted, someone the Avengers had welcomed, someone who had fought beside them, bled beside them, and somewhere along the fractured timeline that fed this portal had become something no contingency plan could address. The portal pulled Thor deeper into the vision, and suddenly he was no longer watching from safety. He stood in that future wasteland, breathing air thick with ash and regret, walking toward his own corpse with legs that felt borrowed from a stranger. Every step brought new details into focus. Every breath carried the taste of battles not yet fought. And when he finally looked upon the face of his killer, something inside Thor came undone. Spider-Man's voice reached him from somewhere impossibly distant, calling his name with increasing desperation. But the vision demanded Thor's complete attention. The corrupted figure standing over his fallen future self raised a hand wreathed in energy, so dark it didn't just absorb light, but seemed to consume the very concept of illumination. Thor's future self tried to fight, tried to rise, tried to summon the thunder that had never failed him across countless millennia of war. But the attack that followed ended everything. The killing blow cracked the sky like glass breaking across the face of heaven. The portal forced Thor to witness it again and again, showing him the same death from every angle. Every timeline branch where he attempted escape, every possible future where he might have changed the outcome. None of them worked. Every path led to the same destination. Every choice ended with Thor falling and failing and dying beneath the hand of someone he never should have trusted. Peter's spider sense exploded through his consciousness like every alarm in the city firing at once, dragging him away from concern for Thor toward awareness of something far more immediate. The portal's awakening had not gone unnoticed. Somewhere in the spaces between dimensions, something ancient had felt the door open and was now moving toward it with purpose that made Peter's enhanced instinct scream. The runes pulsed faster, their rhythm syncing with a heartbeat that didn't belong to anyone in the room. Tower lights flickered and died, establishing a pattern that felt less like electrical failure and more like breathing. The air turned sharp with ozone and something older, a cold that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with approaching extinction. Thor finally tore himself from the vision's grip, stumbling backward with movements that lacked every ounce of the grace that usually defined him. His face had drained of color, the confident thunder replaced by something hollow and haunted. And when Spider-Man caught him before he could fall, Peter felt the god of thunder trembling against his shoulder. Thor didn't blink. His eyes remained fixed on the portal, as if looking away might allow it to grow beyond control. Thor didn't breathe. His chest remained still, as if respiration had become an unnecessary function. Thor didn't roar or rage or summon lightning or do any of the things that made him the warrior the Nine Realms had learned to fear. Instead, Thor whispered, and his voice cracked like stone breaking under pressure no stone should ever bear. "He's coming," Thor said, "and this time I do not win." Behind them, the portal did not close. It widened instead, edges expanding with patient hunger, waiting for whatever nightmare was preparing to step through. Peter helped Thor straighten, noting the way the god's hands still shook despite millennia of training designed to eliminate such weakness. The portal roared again, sound and fury compressed into something that felt almost alive, and the edges of reality stretched like fabric approaching its tearing point. Wind rushed toward the vortex rather than away from it, as if something on the other side was inhaling the room itself. Thor grabbed Peter's wrist with sudden intensity, fingers digging in with strength that would have shattered normal human bones. "It wasn't a monster," Thor said, words tumbling out with desperate speed. "It wasn't a god, not truly. It was him." Peter met Thor's eyes, searching for clarity in pupils that reflected only fear. "Who? Tell me who you saw." The portal answered before Thor could, releasing a burst of energy that slammed Spider-Man against the far wall with force that would have killed anyone without enhanced durability. Thor hit the floor hard enough to crack concrete, and alarms that had been screaming suddenly cut to silence, replaced by something worse. Red emergency lights painted everything in shades of blood and warning as the portal's rhythm shifted from random pulsing to something deliberate. A heartbeat, Peter realized. The portal was beating in time with a heart that existed beyond dimension, beyond time, beyond every boundary the Avengers had ever learned to respect. Then the shape of the portal changed. It flattened first, compressing from spiral to disc, then stretched upward like something standing. The darkness within took form, not emerging, but consolidating. And Peter found himself staring at a silhouette that was unmistakably human in shape, if not in origin. Thor forced himself to his knees despite what looked like considerable pain, eyes locked on the shadow figure forming within the vortex. "He carries my power," Thor growled, "but he is not of my world." The silhouette raised one hand, and lightning coiled around fingers that should not have been capable of summoning thunder. But the lightning was wrong in every way that mattered. It crackled black instead of white, unstable and hungry, and Peter understood instinctively that this was not power meant to protect or defend. This was power designed purely to end things. Spider-Man grabbed Thor's arm, pulling him away from the portal with strength born from desperation. "We need the others. We need everyone." Thor shook his head, movement heavy with certainty Peter had learned not to question. "Calling them will only doom them faster. In the future I witnessed, he kills me last. The others fall before I do. Every single one of them." The portal's sound shifted, vibrations traveling through the tower's metal skeleton, like screaming compressed into frequencies almost too low to hear. Every beam and bolt and weld seemed to carry the voice of whatever was pressing against the dimensional barrier, trying to force its way through. The shadow within the portal moved, head turning as if suddenly aware of something beyond Peter's perception. Slowly, with movements that seemed to require tremendous effort or perhaps tremendous restraint, the figure lifted one blackened hand and pointed directly at Spider-Man. Peter's heart stopped for a single beat, then resumed at twice its normal speed. Thor tried to step forward, to put himself between Peter and the pointing figure, but the shadow's voice stopped him cold. It emerged from the portal distorted and fractured, layered with echoes that suggested it was being spoken across multiple timelines simultaneously. "You open the door," the voice said, and Peter felt each word land in his chest like a physical blow. "He walks through me, and the gods fall." The portal thundered with sound that had no earthly equivalent, and a surge of corrupted lightning exploded outward, tearing through the room with devastating precision. Peter's body moved before his mind could catch up, webline firing automatically to swing him behind a support column, as Thor slammed Mjolnir into the ground and raised a dome of crackling defensive energy. The black lightning struck Thor's shield with force that should have been impossible for anything shy of a cosmic event, and Peter watched in horror as the god of thunder was pushed backward 3 full steps. The floor beneath his boots cracked and buckled. The shield flickered but held. When the attack finally subsided, the shadow within the portal had faded, dissolving back into the swirling darkness like a nightmare retreating at dawn. But the portal itself remained open, its edges now stable in ways they hadn't been before, as if the attack had been less assault and more adjustment. Whatever was coming had finished preparing its entrance. Peter rushed to Thor's side, noting the way the god breathed heavier than any previous battle had ever caused. "Tell me that wasn't you. Some evil twin, some corrupted variant, some version of Thor from a timeline where things went wrong." Thor met Peter's eyes with an expression that held no comfort. "No, the face I saw in the vision, the one who ends my existence, is someone we have trusted, someone who has fought beside us, someone we never suspected." Peter's voice emerged as barely more than whisper. "Then say the name. Just tell me who." The fear in Thor's expression deepened into something that looked almost like shame, as if the knowledge itself was a betrayal he couldn't bring himself to commit. Before he could respond, before Peter could push harder for answers, the entire tower shuddered with force that had nothing to do with the portal. A pulse of energy radiated outward from the vortex, spreading beyond the tower's walls and racing across the city like a shockwave made of pure intention. Every screen within range flickered to static. Every streetlight exploded in showers of sparks. The sky above New York twisted into formations that violated every law of meteorology, clouds spiraling into patterns that centered directly above Avengers Tower. Peter moved to the window and felt his remaining hope drain away. The storm forming overhead moved faster than any natural system, faster than anything that obeyed physics, and the thunder it produced carried no sound, while the lightning it spawned carried no light. This was weather constructed from future memory, built from the prophecy Thor had witnessed. Thor stood and joined Peter at the window, Mjolnir gripped so tightly that his knuckles had gone white. He knows the portal is open now. He knows exactly where we stand. Peter forced himself to ask the question burning through his chest. Who is coming, Thor? I need to know. Thor looked at the portal still swirling behind them, then at the impossible storm gathering above, then finally at Peter with eyes that carried the weight of everything he had witnessed. The one destiny tried to hide, Thor said quietly, even from the gods themselves. The portal flashed with brilliance that temporarily blinded both of them, and Peter understood that the moment of revelation could no longer be delayed. When his vision cleared, the portal was wider still, and the darkness within had begun to take solid form once more. But this time there were two shapes moving within the void, two silhouettes approaching the threshold between dimensions, two versions of the same nightmare preparing to merge into reality. Thor tightened his stance, and Peter prepared for impact, both of them understanding that whatever came next would redefine everything they thought they knew about the boundaries of threat and trust. The figure in the portal spoke again, voice clearer now, closer now, dripping with malice that had been refined across timelines of suffering and rage. Peter, it said, and the name carried weight enough to make Spider-Man's enhanced legs feel weak. Thor moved closer to Peter instinctively, protective stance that said more than words could convey. The portal spoke once more, louder, undeniable, stripped of all distortion and ambiguity. Peter, you let him die. Spider-Man's heart dropped through his chest and kept falling into depths he didn't know existed within him. Thor's eyes widened with sudden terrible understanding. I know that voice, Peter whispered, the words emerging against his will. I know who that is. Before he could say more, before Thor could confirm or deny, a hand shot through the portal's surface. It was charred and cracked, lightning that didn't belong to any god crackling up its wrist, and it reached not for Thor, but for Peter. The future killer wasn't following the expected pattern. He wasn't coming for the god first. He was coming for Spider-Man. The hand reaching through the dimensional barrier twitched with movements that suggested its owner had forgotten how human bodies were supposed to work. Joints bent at angles that made Peter's enhanced stomach churn, cracking sounds emerging from knuckles like ice breaking on a frozen lake. The voice that had called his name echoed again, closer now, layered with emotions Peter recognized all too well. Pain, fury, betrayal, and underneath it all, grief so profound it had curdled into something toxic. Thor swung Mjolnir downward with speed born from countless battlefield centuries, sending a shockwave of lightning across the floor aimed at severing the arm before more could emerge. But the moment his power touched the portal's edge, something impossible happened. The lightning collapsed. Thor's thunder, the fundamental force that defined his existence, was simply snuffed out like a candle flame meeting a hurricane. The energy didn't redirect or disperse or fade naturally. It was consumed, devoured, absorbed by whatever waited on the other side. Thor staggered back with an expression Peter had never seen him wear. He devours my thunder itself. Spider-Man's mind raced through every enemy they had faced, every power they had documented, every threat assessment stored in databases across the planet. Who can do that? Who absorbs the power of a god like it's nothing? The hand withdrew into the darkness before Thor could attempt another strike, leaving behind only a trail of black sparks that drifted through the air like dying fireflies. The portal's intensity dimmed slightly, as if whatever powered it required rest, and for a moment Peter allowed himself to hope that the worst had passed. Then he looked at the floor beneath the vortex and felt that hope die. A thin line of ash was spreading outward from the portal's base, crawling across the marble like an infection seeking healthy tissue. It moved with purpose rather than randomness, burning patterns into the floor that Peter recognized with a jolt of primal horror. Runes, but not Asgardian. Symbols he had seen before in nightmares he had never spoken about, images that had haunted his sleep for weeks after a funeral that had broken something fundamental inside him. Symbols carved into a tombstone he had visited every year since he was 15 years old. Thor noticed the shift in Peter's expression, the way color drained from his face, the way his breathing pattern changed from controlled to ragged. What do you see? Thor demanded. Tell me what those markings mean to you. Peter swallowed against a throat that had gone completely dry. I've seen these before. Years ago, after someone I loved died. They showed up in my dreams for weeks, carved into everything, following me everywhere I looked. Thor's expression darkened with understanding. Dreams can carry warnings from beyond our dimension. Peter's voice cracked despite his best efforts to control it. Dreams don't reach through portals and call my name, Thor. Dreams don't know what I did. The portal pulsed again, a single beat so deep and heavy it seemed to vibrate through Peter's skeleton rather than his ears. Outside the tower, the storm had thickened into something that looked less like weather and more like a wall. Clouds spinning faster until the entire skyline appeared to tilt like a carnival ride approaching structural failure. Thunder rolled across the city, but not the thunder that follows lightning. This thunder sounded like footsteps. Something enormous was approaching, and each step bent the atmosphere a little more, pressed reality a little harder, pushed the boundaries of what this dimension could contain. Thor raised his head, eyes tracking something Peter couldn't perceive. He is near. Whatever barrier held him back has been breached. Spider-Man tried to force air into lungs that seemed to have forgotten their purpose. If he's coming here, coming for this tower, why call out to me first? You're the one he kills. The vision showed your death, not mine. Thor's response carried weight that settled onto Peter's shoulders like physical mass. Because you are the key to everything. He cannot reach me without first reaching you. Peter felt his blood turn cold despite knowing that was physiologically impossible. Why me? What did I do? Thor looked at him, then really looked, with eyes that had witnessed civilizations rise and fall, and the truth in that ancient gaze shook Peter more than any portal or prophecy could have managed. In the vision, Thor said quietly, each word measured and heavy, you were the last one standing beside me. We fought together until the final moment, until he took you from me. Thor paused, and the pause stretched into eternity. And when he took you, when he broke you in front of me, I fell. My thunder died with my hope. Peter stepped backward, every instinct screaming at him to run, to flee, to put as much distance as possible between himself and the role fate had apparently assigned him. He didn't want to be a trigger for prophecy, didn't want to be the breaking point that sent a god to his doom. But the portal didn't care what Peter wanted. It flared open again with violence that shook the tower's foundations. And this time something new emerged. Not a hand, not a shadow, a face, half charred and half familiar. Features Peter had memorized years ago, twisted by forces that should never have touched them. And the sight of that face made Peter's knees buckle beneath him. Thor caught him before he could fall, supporting weight that Peter's enhanced muscles had apparently forgotten how to bear. The face smiled, broken and corrupted and impossibly present, and the voice that accompanied it shattered every wall Peter had built around his memories. You left me to die, Peter. The temperature in the tower dropped so suddenly that frost began crawling up the walls, ice crystals forming on every surface, as the air itself seemed to reject what it was witnessing. Thor's breath became visible, and Peter could see his own exhalations hanging in the frozen atmosphere. Spider-Man stared at the face emerging from the portal, at features he had mourned, at eyes he had closed with his own trembling hands. No, Peter whispered, the word barely audible. It can't be you. You died. I was there. I held you. The figure's smile widened into something that didn't belong on any human face. Death was only the beginning. Thor stepped forward, placing himself partially between Peter and the emerging entity, but the movement was more instinct than strategy. They both understood that physical positioning meant nothing against what they were facing. You want me, Thor said, voice carrying the authority of a god despite everything. I am what you came for. The entity's eyes shifted, and the black lightning crackling around its half-formed body intensified until the illumination cast shadows that moved independently of any light source. No, it growled, voice dropping into registers that vibrated through bone rather than air. I wanted to watch. The portal cracked wider, a sound like reality itself developing fractures that could never be repaired. And the full horror, began stepping through. The entity emerged complete, and Peter's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. The body was familiar, built from memories Peter had tried for years to bury, but the corruption that wrapped it transformed recognition into nightmare. Skin that should have been healthy flesh instead flickered between charred black and ghost pale, unable to decide which state of decay it preferred. Eyes that Peter remembered as warm and trusting now glowed with lightning stolen from a god, and the voice that emerged carried echoes of 1,000 timelines worth of accumulated rage. Thor shifted Mjolnir in his grip, lightning trying to gather around him despite having been absorbed moments earlier. You wear a face that does not belong to you. Whatever you are, you have no claim to the identity you're pretending. The entity laughed, and the sound broke Peter's heart all over again, because underneath the corruption and the fury, he recognized that laugh. He had heard it 100 times in happier moments, in memories he had desperately tried to preserve against the erosion of grief. "I am not pretending," the entity said. "I remember everything, every moment, every promise, every failure." Its head twitched violently, a glitch in its physical form that suggested the corruption was ongoing rather than complete. But the portal showed me things I didn't know when I was alive. It showed me why I died, who let it happen. The entity's eyes fixed on Peter with intensity that made his spider sense feel like continuous screaming. "You," it said, and the word carried centuries of pain compressed into 2 letters. Peter tried to speak, tried to explain, tried to say any of the things he had rehearsed for years at a gravesite where no one could hear him. But his throat had closed around words that refused to emerge. Thor stepped forward, raising Mjolnir with deliberate threat. "Whatever bargain the void offered you, whatever power it promised, you will find only disappointment here. The Avengers do not fall too." The entity moved faster than Thor could track, faster than Peter's spider sense could process, and black lightning exploded from its palm with force that hurled the god of thunder across the room. Thor hit the far wall with impact that cracked concrete and buckled steel, and for a terrible moment he didn't move. Spider-Man's body reacted before his frozen mind could catch up, hands firing weblins toward the entity in desperate attempt to create distance, buy time, accomplish anything other than standing helpless. But the webs dissolved the moment they touched the aura surrounding the corrupted figure, organic material consumed by energy that fed on everything it touched. "You cannot stop me," the entity whispered, suddenly close enough that Peter could see the damage to its face in horrible detail. "You cannot fight what you created." Peter's voice finally broke free of the terror that had been strangling it. "Tell me what you want. Whatever it is, just tell me." The entity leaned closer, and the cold radiating from its body felt less like temperature and more like absence, like standing at the edge of a void that wanted nothing more than to pull him in. "I want," the figure breathed, words carrying frost that crystallized in the air between them, "to finish the future I saw." Thor staggered back to his feet across the room, blood visible on his lip for perhaps the first time Peter had ever witnessed. "You saw a future where you took my power, where you ended my existence. But prophecy is not prison. Futures can be changed." The entity laughed again, and this time there was nothing recognizable in the sound. "I didn't steal your power, God." It raised one hand, and black lightning crackled up its arm in patterns that mimicked Thor's own summoning gestures. "You gave it to me. In that future, in your final moment, you gave me everything you had because you thought it would save him." The entity pointed at Peter. "You sacrificed yourself for a boy who had already failed everyone who ever trusted him." Thor's expression flickered with something that might have been doubt, and Peter felt the weight of those words settle into his chest like stones. Outside the tower, the storm had evolved beyond anything meteorology could explain. Lightning struck the same point repeatedly, each bolt tearing the sky a little wider until a second rift began forming in the clouds directly overhead. Another portal, another presence, another heartbeat joining the rhythm that had been building since Peter's blood first touched the ancient rune. Thor looked up, ancient senses detecting what Peter's human plus spider biology could only dimly perceive. He brought something with him, something else, something waiting. The entity's smile widened. Two timelines converging into one. Two versions of me becoming whole. The broken and the perfected, the corrupted and the completed. Its eyes burned brighter as it spoke. Together we will do what neither could accomplish alone. Spider-Man felt the world tilting around him, reality becoming increasingly unstable under the weight of what was being forced through its barriers. The runes burned into the floor were spreading faster now, climbing walls and racing across ceilings, and each symbol they formed seemed to draw more power from whatever source fed the portal. Thor shouted Peter's name with desperate urgency, and Spider-Man threw himself sideways, just as twin bolts of black lightning descended from two directions simultaneously. The entity before him and the presence above him both unleashed power at the same moment, and where those bolts collided, the air itself seemed to scream. The explosion tore through the tower with force that would have killed anyone standing closer, punching a hole through floors and ceilings until the night sky became visible through the devastation. Peter clung to a surviving pillar, enhanced fingers digging into concrete with strength born from pure survival instinct, and Thor had raised a shield that crackled with failing energy. When the attack subsided, when the dust began settling, Peter looked up and saw what had descended from the second portal. It was the same person, the same face, the same body, the same terrible recognition that made Peter's heart feel like it was being crushed. But this version was different in ways that made the first entity seem almost merciful. Where the portal's emergence had been corrupted and twitching, this arrival was smooth and deliberate. Where the first had carried visible damage from whatever transformation had created it, this version appeared perfected, as if every flaw had been polished away and every weakness eliminated. Two versions of the same nightmare now stood in the ruins of Avengers Tower. The broken one and the completed one, the corrupted and the pure, both looking at Peter with eyes that held identical accusation. Thor pulled himself up from the debris, Mjolnir still gripped in a hand that no longer crackled with lightning. The god's power had been drained by the previous absorption, and Peter could see the weakness in his stance that Thor was trying desperately to hide. The two entities looked at each other, and something passed between them that Peter couldn't interpret. An understanding, perhaps. A merging of purpose that required no words. Then they spoke together, voices harmonizing into something that shouldn't have been possible. Dual tones carrying identical conviction. This time, no god survives. Peter stood slowly, body aching from the impacts it had absorbed, mind racing through options that all seemed to end in failure. Thor straightened beside him, shoulder to shoulder, warrior stance despite depleted power. Two heroes facing two nightmares. Two versions of someone Peter had loved facing two people who had failed to save him. The entities began moving forward in perfect synchronization, black lightning building around them both, and Peter understood with terrible clarity that the fight for their future had truly begun. The entities moved like mirrors of each other, each step calculated, each gesture synchronized in ways that suggested they shared more than just appearance. The broken one carried rage like a wound that refused to heal, while the perfected one displayed cold precision that somehow felt even more threatening. Spider-Man's mind worked through scenarios at enhanced speed, analyzing patterns, searching for weaknesses, trying to find any advantage in a situation that seemed designed to offer none. Thor raised Mjolnir despite its diminished power, lightning flickering weakly around the hammer's head. Whatever you have become, whatever the void has made you, know that I have faced extinction before. I have stared into the end of everything and refused to yield. The perfected entity tilted its head, studying Thor with the detached interest of a scientist examining a specimen. You speak of battles you survived, but survival is not victory, God. Sometimes survival is merely delayed failure. The broken entity laughed, the sound carrying pain that Peter felt in his own chest. He doesn't understand yet. He thinks this is about power, about which warrior proves stronger. He doesn't realize this was never a fight. Peter's spider sense pulsed with warning that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then what is it? If you didn't come here to fight, why tear through dimensions to reach us? Both entities turned their attention to Peter, and the weight of their combined focus made him want to shrink into the shadows. But Spider-Man didn't shrink. Spider-Man stood his ground even when standing seemed impossible. The corrupted version spoke first, voice cracking with emotion it couldn't fully contain. "I came to show you what you created, to make you understand what happens when heroes fail the people who believe in them." The perfected version continued seamlessly. "And I came to ensure the future unfolds as it must. The God dies, the Avengers fall, and you, Peter Parker, you live long enough to witness every moment of it." Thor's grip tightened on Mjolnir. "You speak of futures as if they are fixed, but I have seen prophecies broken before. The Norns themselves have witnessed their predictions shattered by those with will enough to defy them." The Norns, the perfected entity said with something approaching amusement, "are not the ones who showed me what comes next. I have seen beyond their sight, into spaces where even gods fear to look." The air in the ruined tower grew colder still, frost spreading across surfaces that had already been covered, building layers of ice that seemed to draw heat from the very atmosphere. Peter's breath came in visible clouds, and he could see Thor's exhalations hanging heavy in the frozen air. The entities began circling, moving in opposite directions around the two heroes, creating a cage of motion that felt like the tightening of a noose. Black lightning arced between them, connecting the two versions in a circuit of power that crackled with barely contained violence. Spider-Man tracked their movements, Spider Sense painting a picture of trajectories and probabilities that all ended badly. "You keep talking about futures and prophecies and things I supposedly did wrong, but you haven't told me the one thing I actually need to know." Both entities paused their circling, attention fixed on Peter with intensity that made his skin crawl. "Ask your question," the broken one said. "Tell me who you are," Peter demanded. "Not what the portal made you. Not what the corruption turned you into. Tell me who you were before any of this happened." Silence stretched through the frozen ruins, broken only by the distant sound of the city's emergency sirens and the continuous crackle of black lightning connecting the two entities. The perfected version spoke first, voice carrying absolute certainty. "We are the consequence of your failure." The broken version added, pain flooding every word. "We are the person you promised to save and didn't." Peter's heart clenched, memories flooding back despite every wall he had built against them. "I've lost a lot of people. We all have. Being a hero means watching people die and knowing you couldn't stop it. This was different," the broken entity snarled. "This was a choice. You chose wrong, and now we choose to make sure you understand what that costs." Thor moved slightly, adjusting his position to better protect Peter from the circling threats. "Speak plainly or do not speak at all." These riddles served no purpose but to delay the inevitable confrontation. The entities exchanged another look, that wordless communication that suggested they were far more connected than their separate forms implied. "Very well," the perfected version said. "Let us show you instead." Both entities raised their hands simultaneously, and the black lightning that connected them flared into something brighter, something that carried images within its crackling energy. Peter saw flashes of scenes he recognized and scenes he didn't. A battle, an explosion, a body falling, his own hands reaching out, too slow, always too slow. A grave marked with a name that made Peter's chest feel hollow. And then, beyond the memories, visions of what the future held if these entities succeeded. The Avengers compound reduced to rubble. Thor's broken body lying in the ruins. Cities burning under skies torn open by dimensional rifts. And Peter himself, alive in the midst of it all, forced to watch everyone he loved fall one by one. The vision faded, leaving Peter shaking with emotions he couldn't name and didn't want to acknowledge. Thor had seen it too, his expression shifting from defiance to something more complicated. "The future you showed me in the portal," he said slowly. "It was incomplete. There was more you chose not to reveal." The corrupted entity smiled, and for a moment the face beneath the damage was visible, familiar, beloved. "There is always more. The portal only shows what the viewer can survive. The full truth would have broken you before we ever arrived." Peter forced his voice to steady despite everything inside him that wanted to scream. Whatever you're planning, whatever future you think is inevitable, we won't let it happen. We've beaten impossible odds before. Have you, the perfected entity, asked? Or have you simply delayed consequences that were always coming? The Broken One added, every villain you stopped, every apocalypse you prevented, every world you saved. You treat them as victories. But from where we stand, from where the future looks back, they were just practice runs. Warm-ups for the moment, when everything actually falls apart. Thor raised Mjolnir, and despite its diminished power, lightning began gathering in the clouds visible through the ruined ceiling. Enough words. If you came for battle, then battle you shall have. But know that I have faced beings who claimed to be inevitable before. They all fell. The entities looked at each other one more time, and something shifted in their expressions. The Broken One's rage seemed to crystallize into something harder, while the Perfected One's cold precision acquired an edge that hadn't been there before. Then let us begin, they said together. Let us show you what happens when the future stops waiting. They moved. Right, continue.